right. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Tail Spinner Swap. I'm, as my Zoom box says, Dana Sherry, and I've been helping us learning the ropes to help out with Liz and Sally to work with the swap. And tonight I get to MC because our fearless leader, Liz Nichols, is our featured teller tonight. Liz is one of the organizers of Tail Spinners. She is behind Laughter Yoga. Has been the director of storytelling programs at Stagebridge. I think the list goes on and on and on, and you all know as well as I do what a marvelous teller she is. So with no further ado, I will pass the stage over to Liz Nichols.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Okay, I want to have gallery view. I don't want to just see me. Okay, I want to see you. Well, I want to share a story tonight. It's not too spooky, but it's totally Halloween. It's all about Halloween. And it's about Halloween before Halloween came to this country. And when Halloween meant something different. I'm going to tell you the story of Tam Lin. And some of you may know that story already. You may know it from books, or you may know it from the child ballad, the ballads that were collected in the 1800s, late 1800s, around Scotland, Ireland, England, by a man named Child. And it's sometimes called Tam Lane, has different names. This version I'm going to tell you is more from texts. I'm drawing a lot. I want to honor Jane Yolen, some you librarians, ex-retired librarians. Yes, Jane Yolen, poet, writer, and collector of old stories and reteller. And she's got a book called Not One Damsel in Distress. And she's also done a picture book specifically of just this story called Tam Lin. And it looks to me from another book on my bookshelf, which is Joseph Jacobs' English Fairy Tales, which is published in 1890, that she went back to him for, so it goes back and it goes on. Now, I told this story a week or two ago with a Halloween program to some middle schoolers. And I said to them, there's going to be fairies in this story. And right away, one boy called out, "Oh, great, I love fairies." So then I asked them, okay, well, why do you love fairies? What's the image of fairies when you hear that word, And so they gave different answers. And I would invite, if there's anybody who, those of you who like to use the chat, if you want to put one or two words about, okay, what is a fairy like? Do you like fairies? I'll tell you what they said after I see a couple of things that you say. All right, we've got mischievous, unpredictable, magical, and they grant wishes. Playful, Tinkerbell, right. Well, the they grant wishes part was what was on the mind of these middle schoolers, because they said the tooth fairy. That was the first thing they said. Like fairies do good things, like they do nice things for us, like give us money for our teeth. And so I had to explain to them, the fairies in this story are not Tinkerbell. They're not Disney fairies, and they're not the tooth fairy. This story is from the time when fairies were magical, yes. Dangerous, Dana says, yes. If you crossed them, you called them the good folk or the fair folk, good people, the fair folk, because you didn't want them to have any reason to mess with you. But sometimes they messed with you, even if, you tried your best to avoid them. And that's what happens in this story. Many years ago, there were two children, Bird Janet and Tam Lin, and they grew up together. They were both the children of earls. So they were of the important families of the countryside. And they were fast friends. Because of all the children, they were the boldest. Now, all the parents then, just like parents now, they tell their children things to keep them safe. Don't go here, be careful there. And all these parents told these children, don't go into Contra Wood. It's dangerous, stay out of there. The reason was because the fairies had taken over Contra Castle. But Bird Janet knew that Contra Castle had been in her family for generations and that she should inherit it one day. And she was not going to stay away from there. She was bold. And so the two of them would go there and anywhere else they wanted. And as they grew up, they grew from being just friends to more than friends. They grew to fall in love, and they promised they would marry each other when they came of age. And luckily for them, when they came of age, their parents agreed, and the wedding day was set. And all would have been happily ever after, if not for the fact that about a month before the wedding date, Tam Lin went off one day hunting, and he didn't come back. And over days and weeks, they searched for him, and he was never found. And everyone gave up. Well, everyone except Bird Janet. She wandered here and she wandered there, searching for him. And one of the places she wandered was Contra Wood. And one day, as she was wandering in there, she came upon a bush with beautiful flowers on it in the middle of the forest. And feeling sad and lonely and depressed, she thought to pick a flower to cheer herself. She picked one, and she picked another, put it behind the next ear. She picked a third, tucked it in her breast. And when she picked that third flower, up from the ground appeared none other than Tam Lin. Where have you been, Tam Lin? Oh, Janet, I have been in fairyland. I have been under the fairy hill. The fairy queen has captured me and made me a knight, in fact. She values me, but she keeps me. How did that happen? Well, you see, I was hunting in these woods, and I came to the fairy hill where fairies live underground, and I wasn't thinking, I wasn't careful, and I went round Widdershins. Have anybody here heard Widdershins? Widdershins is counterclockwise, going to the left. Now, I'm left-handed, so I object to this idea, but this idea is all over, and ideas like it are all over the world. The idea that going to the left is dangerous. Going to the left is the wrong way. Going to the left is sinister, where going to the right is right. So whether I like it or not, it was real. He went Widdershins, and he said, when I did that, a great sleep came over me. And when I woke up, I was in the fairy land. Well, you're here with me now. You're up above. Why don't you leave? Well, actually, it's rather nice in fairyland. In fairyland, everyone is merry. Everyone is always dancing, playing music. Everyone is young and beautiful and strong and healthy. Everyone is talented. So it's not a bad place. I might stay there except for you and except for one other thing. You see, tomorrow night is All Hallows Eve, he said to her. Tomorrow night is Halloween. And and she knew, and he knew, and I know that Halloween is that night every year when the wall, the border that separates our world from the world of others, not the living, the spirits, the ancestors. It's the day when that border gets thin and soft and they can break through. And that happens every year, he said, but this year is a special year. It is the 7th year. Every 7th year, the fairy horde must ride into our world and they must pay a tithe, a tax, to the devil. And that tithe is a living thing from our world. And the only living thing they have down there right now is me. And so I am afeared for Janet, because Janet said, well, I'll go Widdershins on purpose. I want to, I'll be with you. At least I can be with you. He said, by tomorrow, day after tomorrow, I may be dead. So don't do that. Well, if I can't do that, isn't there anything I can do? Well, there is one thing. I'll do it. Well, it's one thing, but it's a big thing. Well, tell me what it is. Tomorrow night, the fairy horde will ride towards the well at Miller's Cross to pay that tithe. You must go there at the hour of midnight, but make sure you bring with you some holy water, and make sure you have your cloak of green with you. You'll need those things. When you get there, sprinkle some of that holy water in a circle all around you for protection, and then you must wait. Then you will see them come. First, a troop of black horses, then a troop of brown horses, and finally a troop of white horses. And that will be the fairy queen at the head of those white horses with all her knights around her, including me. And you must pull me down from my horse and hold me tight, or you will never have me again. Well, I'll do that, but how will I know who you are? Good question. He thought about it. I will wear a star on my helmet, and all the knights will be wearing their gloves, you know, all their armor with their gloves, but one hand will be bare. So you look carefully, you find me, you pull me down. I can do that. Of course I'll do that. That's not so easy, because you see, Janet, the fairies don't want to let me go. They will turn me in seeming into many, many things, dangerous things, frightening things. But you must hold on. No matter what, you must hold on. And finally, after many, many transformations, they will turn me into a bar of red hot iron. And you must not let go of that bar. Take that bar and throw it into the water of the well. Sprinkle some more of the holy water on top and wait, and I will rise up. And you must throw your cloak around me and hide me behind you in the circle and wait till the sun comes up, and only then will I be able to be your husband one day. And Bird Janet thought, and she said, I don't know if I can do it, but I know that I can try, and I will try. And so they parted. And she went back to her parents' house, their castle. And the next night was Halloween night, All Hallows Eve. And her parents had planned a great ball, supposedly to honor the holiday, but really because, as we know, they had given up on Tamlin. They needed another bridegroom for their daughter. And so they had invited all the eligible young men from all around the countryside. And Bird Janet was forced to dance with one after the other. Now, some were clumsy, some were awkward, some didn't have the best hygiene, but even the most beautiful and handsome and charming of them, she had no eyes for them, right? She only had eyes for Tamlin. So as soon as she could, she snuck away from the party before midnight. She made sure she had her cloak, and she went to the chapel on the way, and she dipped a vial and got that holy water and tucked it carefully in her pocket. And then she went at midnight with the owls hooting and the wind whistling and creepy noises all around. She went to that deserted place, that well at Miller's Cross. And she sat and she waited. And she pulled that cloak around her. And finally she heard it. She heard a tinkling of little, sounded like bells, the fairy bells on the fairy horses, she realized. And then she heard the sound of dainty fairy horse hooves. Dust, and there they came. First, the black horse troop with the prince of the fairies at its head, and it passed on. And then the brown horse troop, and that was with the king of the fairies. And finally, the troop of white horses, milk white steeds, glowing like the moon. And in their center, on high on her horse, was the fairy queen. And Bird Janet looked at her, and she had never seen a woman so beautiful. She had never seen a woman so tall, so straight, so regal, so powerful. And also, she had never seen a woman with eyes so cold. She tore her eyes away so that she could look all through all the knights around her. And there was one with a star on his helmet and only one glove on. And she went over to his bridle on his horse and she pulled him down and she held him tight. And as she held him, all of a sudden, and she thinking herself, I can do this, until the block of ice that she was holding chilled her to the bone. And just as she thought, I think I can do this, the ice was gone. A flame, a giant flame shot up into the sky, and she held on to it. It changed next into a lion with gaping jaws right near her. It turned next into a snake, but she held on. This is my Tamlin, she thought. I must hold on, and she held on. It changed into a dove. That was a tricky one, I thought, because instead of she had to grab it and pull it down. It turned into many, the fairies turned Tamlin into one thing after another. And in the singers of the ballad, it depends on how much time you have, how many things Tamlin turns into, which things you want him to turn into. But in the end, there is in her hands a red hot iron bar, and she takes that bar and she throws it into the well, takes out the rest of that holy water, sprinkles it on, and waits. And waits and prays and waits and waits and prays. And then up he comes, as naked as the day he was born, her Tamlin, and taking her cloak, her green cloak, wrapping it around him, pulling him down and hiding him behind her within that circle of protection. She sees the fairies, all of them, just searching everywhere, shouting, screaming. It's the most terrifying scene. And that fairy queen on her horse, still looking down, ordering everyone to find her Tamlin. But what's this? What's this? In the east, the sky is starting to lighten. And Bird Janet thinks, just a little more, just a little time more. And then the moment, the sun peeks out over the hills. And Bird Janet turns to that fairy queen and says, he is mine, Tamlin is mine. Your power is done. Halloween is over. Go back. And I have him. I have won him. Well, it's true that Halloween is over. It's time for the fairies to go back to their home under the ground. And they turn and start to go back. But the fairy queen is not quite ready to go. The fairy queen has a message for Tamlin. And I'll tell you, I wish I could sing this ballad, but I can't. So I'm just going to read to you her words. And I also can't speak the beautiful old Scottish kind of English, in which I'll put something in the chat that you can listen to later. But this is what she says. She looks down from her high perch on that horse, and she looks down at Tamlin and she says, if only what I know today I'd known on yestermorn, I'd have plucked out your heart of flesh and put in a heart of stone. And if yesterday I'd known full well your true love could do what she should, I'd have taken out your twin gray eyes and put in 2 eyes of wood. And if I had known but yestermorn that I have learned this day, I'd have paid my tax 7 times to hell before you'd been won away. And with that, she turned and followed the rest of the troops back to the fairy hill. And that was the last that Tamlin and Bird Janet saw of her. And of course, they turned in the other direction and walked back to Bird Janet's parents' house, their castle, where, with greatest haste possible, a wonderful wedding feast that had been put off was now back on the schedule. And it was celebrated for a whole week. And that was just the beginning, right, of a life lived happily and well by 2 brave souls, Tamlin and Bird Janet. And that's the story.
Liz, that was amazing. Thank you. You know, you were saying that you wished you had been able to sing it, but it was just chills down the spine to hear you deliver what the Fairy Queen said. So I know we have other stories coming up, but what was it about this story that made you pick it?
Well, I do love the old ballads, you know, and I love, but in a lot of the versions of the ballad, Tamlin is guarding the Fairy Queen's, because she's taken over this whole woods, and he accosts every young woman who comes and demands from her something that, you know, she might not want to give. And so I like even though I love the music of the ballad, and I love how ballads can be they can be very harsh, right? The line between love and murder and things like all that stuff. So I love that, but I also love this version that was more a sweet relationship between equals. I think that's one thing I loved about it. And yeah, and we've had other stories here of, like, Bev, you told a story of of a changeling, you know, of fairies taking a child and leaving changelings in their place. I guess, you know, those are they're all fascinating. So
Thank you. And that's good inspiration to go out and look at the other versions too. So thank you again. And yeah, we have, so I will post the full teller list in the chat in just a moment, but we will begin with Beverly Schwartz. Thank you.
Good evening. The name of my story is A Mind of Their Own. It's a true story. I was teaching 3rd grade, and we had just finished our holiday party and had 10 days coming up for winter vacation. My students walking out the room said, well, who are you going to invite next to help us do demonstrations in small groups, Ms. Schwartz? We really had fun this fall. And I said, well, we're going to do the body and health. You'll have fun next semester. You'll enjoy it. I hadn't planned on it. I was going to teach it myself. I said, oops, I really committed myself. Where was I going to get people to help? So I thought during vacation, I picked up the phone to Albany Medical School and I asked for the dean. And believe it or not, the dean came on the phone. And he said, hello, how can I help you? This is Dean, you know, whatever. And I said, well, and I explained that we like to have mentors that actually will demonstrate and talk and teach the children, but then break up into groups and do hands-on science so they really learn what you're trying to teach about what body part or health or nutrition you're talking about. And he said, well, I've been looking for people because our students have to do community service so many hours per year in order to graduate from medical school. Oh my God, I said, I just won the lottery. He said, we'll get you some students, call you, and you can figure things out. And we did. We worked a couple weeks, planned the whole semester, and they came in. Well, it was a success. The first thing they did was, we're going to learn about the human body and the skeleton. And they were brought in a real live skeleton and bones of real live skeletons separate. And they were trying to teach the kids the real medical names. Now, these were third graders. Patella is the knee. And they would tell the kids the names and talk about it, but I could see my kids were not really getting the real names of the bones. Then I said one day, okay, everyone, push your chairs and desks against the wall, get in a circle and watch me. Put the right patella in, put the right patella out, put the right patella in, and twirl it all about. So we, for the whole semester, did the hokey pokey and learned those medical names with no problem. And the season progressed. And they had so much fun looking at microscopes, body parts, you name it, they brought it in. Well, they were like in pre-med here, medical school. Now, we had to learn the eye, and they didn't know what to do about the eye. That was hard. So I'll invite my eye doctor. And he came in and he did a great job. He had 3 kids of his own, so he knew how to talk to kids too. And then he said, okay, everyone break up into your groups. I'm told that we're going to do hands-on. And then he takes a cooler from underneath the table and he opens it up. I went to the butcher this morning and I got cow's eyes. We're going to dissect real cow's eyes this morning. I said, oh, I had always invited parents there. And I said, oh my God, someone's going to tattle and talk to the principal or I'm going to be in trouble for this one. Well, I said, wait a minute, stop. Anyone who doesn't want to do this, meet me in the back of the room and we'll talk about the eye. Okay, you can start. Kids, everyone come to me who wants to be with me. I was a squeamish one. No one left. They were parents and kids. They were really into this. And I said, so I finally walked around the room, but I still didn't like to look at it. Well, finally, the semester was ending and the medical students came in and said, we have a surprise. The dean wants to bus you to Albany Med and give them a tour. And they'll feed you lunch, but you have to put on a play to show all the medical students what you learned. And maybe next year you'll attract more medical students to help you in your class. Well, I thought that was a good deal, but a play in 3 weeks? Well, we did it. We practiced. We broke them up into 3 groups and each of the medical students took a group and had practiced their part of the play. Now, I had some very smart girls in my class and they said, you always see the doctors in the movies and stuff as men. We want the girls to be doctors and we want the boys to be the nurses. I said, that sounds to me like a good idea. And we did it. Well, we ended up practicing really hard. And the medical students said they'd dress us up in the gowns and IV bottles and everything. And we went and we had a great tour. We saw the emergency room, the physical therapy. We went to the blood bank. We looked at the other microscopes and saw other body parts that couldn't be taken to the classroom. We saw the kitchen, the laundry. We saw everything. And they fed us a wonderful lunch. And then the medical students got everyone dressed and we walked to a lecture hall. And it was like the Coming Down amphitheater. The 380 people was the maximum. I said, oh dear, I hope, they have some people come and see us. And we set it up and the dean came and introduced himself to me. He goes, you ready? I said, yep, we're ready. And he opened the doors. There was standing room only. I said, where did these people come from? Every medical school professor, teacher, doctor. I couldn't believe it was that crowded. And then the play began. I had lost sleep the night before. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if they can't remember their lines? I was a nervous wreck. And the play started. A little boy coming out of the ambulance and into the emergency room, hurt on the playground. Oh, Rodney was a great actor. Oh, my stomach. I hurt my stomach when I fell. Help me, help me, help me. And they finished the introduction and they bring him in and put him on a table in the emergency room. Okay, that went good. I'm feeling a little better. I'm breathing a little. I'm still kind of like holding my breath. The second was the emergency room, checking and seeing what's wrong with Rodney. Oh, he's laying on the table. What, everyone was laughing in the audience and they were enjoying it. And Jackie, the head, doctor comes in and says, "Did you check out the boy? What's wrong with him?" "Well, we think he has a bleed in his stomach. I think we need you and your surgical skills to go in and fix with the problem." Okay. Part 2 went good. I'm breathing easy. I'm saying, "Oh my God, they're doing great." So they put him on the doctors and nurses of the scene 2 leaves and the surgical people come in. And she goes to Rodney, "Now we're going to put you to sleep. You're not going to feel anything and we're going to fix your tummy. And then when you wake up, you'll stay here a few days to get well and you'll be back to school in no time." So they put the mask on him, put him to sleep. And I'm going, "Oh, it's working." And then they had the sheets separated, plastic knife in the girl's hand, Jackie, and she cuts it out. And then it happened. My worst fears happened. They went rogue on me. These kids, all of a sudden, after she cuts his tummy, red water that looks like blood squirts out of the stomach, goes all over their outfits that they're wearing, and some of it goes into the first and second rows, and got medical students and all the people in the audience covered with red dye. I was like frozen. And she goes, "Oh, we have a bleeder. We have to fix it." And again, the water squirts out of that area. I'm going, "Where the hell are they getting the water from?" And she goes, "We got it. It was a blood bleed. We've sewn it together and we're saving Rodney. We sew him up and we will, wake him up soon." Oh my God. Again, and the second time, the blood had gone all over the floor. The people there, and they were laughing, standing ovation. They were really into this disaster that they had done. Well, they woke Rodney up. I'm almost hyperventilating at that point. And they wake him up and say, "Rodney, we saved your life. You're going to be fine. And we're going to keep you here for a few days and you'll go back to school." And then a little girl goes with her card, "Thank you for coming." And we had a standing ovation. They were laughing. Nobody seemed to mind to be bloodied and stuffed by whatever came out. And we had planned, we'd all get up in a row and we'd stand in a couple rows and bow and smile and say, "Thank you, thank you." Well, when Ronnie rolled off that table, 2 turkey basters fell on the floor. The parents were also involved. They had also knew that I was nervous and they did it anyways. Now we're all standing there and we're bowing, and Jackie, the head doctor, elbows me in the ribs as we're getting up next to me. And she looks at me and she says, "Miss Schwartz, we gotcha." And my class certainly had a mind of their own. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bev. I imagine that every child in that class has told stories about those days as well. So that is quite a memorable year that you gave them with that.
Yeah,
So,
I did that from 1985 to 2007. I had all the mentors come in for all the projects.
that's a lot of really lucky kids. Thank you. And our next story will be from Bobby Kincaid.
All right, I'm here. I'm going to do the gallery. I don't like looking at myself. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. All right, here it goes. This story is from multi-stories by, I'm going to miss his name, Peasant de Spain, he collected a whole bunch in 1993. And I did Spooky Tales with Jean and Karen and Carol up in the Redwood Parks. And this is one of the stories I told. And here we go. How Shang catches a ghost. Well, he lived in this tiny village in China. And every night, this ghost came and yelled and hollered and screamed and berated him. Well, Shang, he couldn't take this any longer, so he decided he'd do something. So he took flour and painted his face white and his hair and sprinkled it on his body, and his wife wrapped these robes around him so he looked like he was floating. And he went off into the woods and he sat down. And it was kind of a gloomy, foggy night. And he was sitting there and he noticed that this shape was moving through the trees. It was a white shape. And he was getting a little horrified and a little eerie feeling when this hand grabbed his arm and he said, "Who are you?" And Langshan said, I'm a new ghost. I'm a new ghost. And Langshan said to him, "Well, who are you?" He said, "Well, I'm the ghost man. I live in these woods." And then the ghost man looked at him and said, what happened to you?" He said, "Well, I was helping the farmers and I fell in this ravine and they just looked down and thought I was dead, so they didn't bother to help me." And the ghastly ghost man said, "Well, same thing happened to me. I was a traveler going through their village and a merchant killed me and they didn't do anything about it. They didn't honor my death. They just took me to the woods and threw me. And here I am. So every night I can see you're a little angry. Every night I go and harass them. Would you like to come with me?" And of course, the new ghost said, "Oh, of course I will." So they started walking along and the old ghost said, "You sure make a lot of noise." He said, "Well, I just died. I'm still heavy," crunching on the leaves. And they went a little further and they went through this creek and the new ghost went slop, slop, slop. And the old ghost said to him, "Ghosts don't do like that. You're supposed to float across the water." And Shem said, "I told you, I'm a new ghost." Well, the old ghost, the old ghastly man said, "Here, get up on me and I'll carry you." Well, he carried him for a little bit and he went, "Oh, I can't carry you. You're too heavy." And the young ghost said to him, "Sure." He said, I'm new and I'm still heavy from my human body." So he said to the ghostly ghost, young Shindid said, "Let me carry you." Well, the guy was really light. And finally the old ghost started complaining, "You're jumping and you're dodging and you're bumping me." He said, "I can't stand this. Let me off." So of course he slid off and Yun was a little kind of embarrassed, but after a little while, as they're getting close to the village, and he said, "What are you afraid of?" And the ghost said, "Humans." And Sri he laughed and he laughed and he said, "Humans, you spook them every night." He said, "No, not humans. They're spit." And so Lug laughed again, and the old ghost said, "Hey, that's not a laugh. You got to sound really wicked." So they practiced some very bad laughs. He said, "Use that when you get into the village." And then he got to the village and Sri Lang said, "Well, who are you going to scare tonight?" And he said, the old ghost said, "Well, his name is Su Lang. He thinks he's very clever and very smart, but I'm going to get him." So he said, "Well, you're from the village. Show me where he lives." So Su Lang showed him his house, and the old ghost stopped at the stairs and he said, "I'm going to turn into a horse. You become a pig and we're going to go in there and we're going to stomp and we're going to yell and we're going to say how terrible Su Yang is to his animals." Well, about that time, the old ghost turned into the horse and Su Yang grabbed him by his mane and he turned the horse around and he spit on him and whap, zoom, the horse was a real horse. And the horse started saying, "This is awful. This is horrible. How could you do this to me? We were friends. How could you do this to me?" And Shuan kept him by the mane and he took him into the shed and he put him in a stall. And the old ghost was just griping and moaning and complaining. He put a nice blanket on him and he put some oats up in his mouth so he couldn't hear. So during that time, Silang would loan the horse out to the farmers, and the farmers loved him. He helped with this work and everything. But when Sulang picked him up, he would just gripe and complain and moan. And he finally got tired of it. He said, "Hey, horse, do you want to go back and live in the forest?" And the horse stopped complaining, and he looked and he thought and he thought. And he said, "No, you brush me, you give me oats. I have a nice bed here, and the farmers love me. No, I'm going to stay." So that's how Sulang caught a ghost, with a very deadly trick. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bobby. That, yeah, it takes courage, it takes cunning, and I guess, I think it says, yeah, and you get to keep the ghost, I guess, if you play your cards right, as long as you can stand it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And our next story will be from Elizabeth Overmeyer.
And probably every storyteller has had the experience at this time of year of walking into a classroom or into a library and seeing very small children say, "Oh, we want a really scary story. We want you to turn off the lights. We are not afraid of anything." And you look at them and you know that, yes, you are full of scary stories like Molly Culhane and Captain Murderer, that are so much fun to tell to the right age. And these kids are not the right age. But this is one of those stories that it just verges on a little mystery, a little spookiness that you can tell to really the little guys. They'll think they're being brave. This is a story that comes from Japan. It's a story that Margaret Reed MacDonald collected in one of her books. And it's a story about the magic foxes in Japan, kitsune. Japan is full of kitsune, these magic foxes. And they can turn themselves into anything they like. They could turn themselves into a samurai warrior, a woodcutter, a tree, a leaf. And they are very tricky. And one time in Japan, there was a young boy called Zuten. And Zuten lived in a temple high up on a mountain, not many other people around. There was a forest, and the forest was full of creatures. And Zuten's job in the temple was to sweep the temple. It was to dust the altar where there stood the golden statue of the Lord Buddha. And then at the end of every day, it was his job to prepare the rice for the evening meal. And one day he was in the kitchen filling the rice kettle full of water when he heard Zuten, Zuten, Zuten. It was his own name. He ran to the shoji windows. He pulled them open. There was nobody there. He went back into the kitchen, began to wash that rice. And again, Zuten, Zuten, Zuten. He ran, he opened those shoji windows, and there was nothing there. But he knew something strange was happening. And he said to himself, I am going to hide by this shoji door. Now, the shoji door was made of rice paper covering wooden slats. And when you opened it, you pulled the parts apart. And in those mountains, there was living a kitsune. And the kitsune had discovered that if he crept unseen up to the temple, and if he rubbed his bushy tail against those wooden slats, it would make a sound like shui, shui, shui. And then if he knocked his head against the rice paper, it would make a sound like ben, ben. And so he called out, Shuiten, Shuiten, Shuiten. And Shuiten was right there. He heard that. And he was ready to act. He reached up, he pulled open the shoji screen, and the whole kitsune tumbled in head first into the temple, and Sujin closed that screen. And now there was that kitsune springing to his feet and running around and around the temple faster. And Sujin was chasing after him. And faster they went until suddenly the kitsune was gone. But Sujin was clever. He knew about kitsune. He knew that this kitsune could not have disappeared from this room, and he must have turned into something else. And he looked around. There, on the altar, where there was a golden statue of the Lord Buddha, there were now 2 golden statues of the Lord Buddha. And Zuten knew that one was not the real Lord Buddha. But which one? But he was clever. He approached the altar. He bowed. He said, I see 2 Lord Buddhas, but I know that there is only one. I am fortunate, though, that whenever I pray to the Lord Buddha always gives me a sign. The Lord Buddha sticks his tongue out at me. And so he bowed his head. He put his hands together. He said his prayers. At the end of his prayers, he tapped on the temple drum slowly. And as he watched, that Buddha on the left stuck out his tongue. Why would a Buddha stick out his tongue? But kitsunes didn't know that. Zuten said, yes. To himself, he said, yes. And out loud, he said, and now that our prayers are done, Lord Buddha, you will follow me down the hallway to the kitchen, as you always do. And he started off down the hall, And soon he heard a noise behind him, and he looked, and there was that Buddha, the one who had stuck his tongue out at him, and he was following Zuten all the way down the hallway into the kitchen. And now, Lord Buddha, this is your favorite part of the day. I know this is the part of the day when you take a bath in the rice kettle. And Zuten reached down, picked up that golden Buddha, and put him into an enormous iron kettle full of water. And then he lit a flame under the kettle, and the kettle got warm. It got warmer, it got hot, it got hotter and hotter still, until that kettle was bubbling and dancing on top of the stove, and there were moans coming from it. And there was a terrible whirring sound, and suddenly a kitsune's bushy tail was hanging over the edge. And then pop, 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 4 kitsune legs popped out. And Zuten ran to the shoji door and opened the panels. And then he went back and he lifted the lid off the pot. And out popped the kitsune, made straight for the shoji door, and disappeared down the hill, back into the forest, and never came back again.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. That was exactly as you described it, somewhat mysterious, and I never would have guessed about the tongue. I thought you would do something, but that was not what I could have imagined. Thank you. And I actually have the pleasure of being the next teller, and my story is kind of well, I mean, it's not along the lines of Liz's story, or Elizabeth's story, but it's similar in that it is one that I developed for children of a certain age who are interested in Halloween stories, but you kind of got to be careful with it. And I thought this was going to be brilliant. It's an adaptation of the story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it seemed like it was right in that sweet spot. Turns out I was completely wrong. It's the only story I've ever told that has frightened my own children. So hopefully you are all old enough to handle the story of the chocolate chewing gum. And it begins, as so many of the best stories do, on Halloween. And there was a girl. Her name was Helen. And she was in 5th grade. And in that time and at that place, 5th grade was the age when children were allowed to go trick-or-treating with their friends without their parents supervising them. And so Helen's parents made her promise that she would not eat any of her Halloween candy until she got home, because, as we know, parents give good advice about being safe, and they knew that Helen had a serious chocolate addiction, and so she swore she would not eat anything. And she and her friends went out and they trick-or-treated at every single house in the neighborhood, up and down in the neighboring neighborhoods. But then they came to that house. Every town has one, that creepy house, that house that is ramshackle, that you're not really sure who lives in there. And you never, ever go there on Halloween. But had a jack-o'-lantern in front of it. And Helen stopped, and she said, "I'm going to do it." And her friend said, "No, you can't, that's terrible." She said, I'm going. And she walked up as fast as she could before she could think better of it. She came onto that dark, cobwebby porch. And she reached out and she knocked on the door. And she waited. And it was even creepier up close. And she thought, all right, I'll give it to the count of 10 and then I'll go. So she counted, she got to 10 and she turned to go when suddenly the door creaked open. And there was an old woman with long, scraggly hair and a long, scraggly nose and a large bowl of candy. And she said, oh, I do love little children. And Helen said, thank you. And she grabbed the candy without even looking at what it was. And she ran back down to the street. And her friends were amazed. And they said, what did you get? And she looked. And she had received something that she had never even heard of before. She smelled it to be sure. It was chocolate chewing gum. And she knew she had promised her parents she would not eat any of the candy before she got home, but chocolate chewing gum, who had ever heard of such a thing? So she opened it up bit by bit and popped it in her mouth. And it was like hot fudge and brownies and cake, chocolate cake and candy bars all at once. And it was the most amazing thing she had ever chewed in her life. And her friends finally called her back to reality and pointed out it was time to go home. And so they walked back to their houses and she came, she was chewing and the flavor, it just didn't fade. It was still, when she got to her house, it was just as delicious as when she'd first put it in. And she couldn't let her parents see her chewing it, but she couldn't throw it away. It was clearly not done. And so she took it and she put it back in the wrapper and she put it in her pocket. And she went in and her parents sorted through her candy and gave her some things and said that she could go up to her room and she could have a few pieces before she brushed her teeth and went to bed. But she went up there, she didn't need anything else. She just popped that chewing gum back in her mouth. And it was endlessly good. And so when it was time to brush her teeth and go to bed, she couldn't throw it away. And so she took it and she put it on her nightstand. She'd come back to it in the morning and she brushed her teeth and she lay down and she went to sleep. And in her dreams, she was chewing that gum again and it was so good. But then she woke up and she was chewing the gum. And how did that happen? And she thought I must have grabbed it in my sleep. I'll put it on my dresser on the other side of the room. And so she put it over there and she went back to sleep. And she was dreaming about chewing that gum again. And she woke up and she was chewing it again. How had it gotten into her mouth again? And she thought, this is never going to work. I'm going to have to put it in my closet and I'll close the door. So she put it in the closet and she closed the door. She couldn't really fall back asleep. And she was lying there thinking about how this all could have happened when suddenly she heard it. A voice. Oh, I do love little children. And she jumped out of bed and she looked, and there, coming across the floor, throbbing as it came, was the chocolate chewing gum. And the voice was coming from the candy. She got a glass jar, and she put the chewing gum in it and she put the lid on. And she took it downstairs and she went out into the yard and she dug a deep, deep hole and she buried that gum and she left it there until the next Halloween. And she just had to know if it was still there, if it was still safe in the jar. And so she went out and she dug and she dug and she dug. All she found was a broken jar. And so when you go out trick-or-treating this year, be very careful because that gum is still out there somewhere. And hopefully you can all sleep tonight despite that terrifying chocolate candy story. I think it was just a little too realistic compared to the other ones. So at this point, we're going to pause the recording. Okay. So with the recording started again, we do have a couple of minutes and we can fit in one more story from Storm. And Marnie, I'm sorry to spring that on you. I'm sorry I got caught up in the story and didn't send you a message. But if you could, if we could feature Storm for a brief story.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Storm. I'm from Greenfield, Massachusetts, and this is an original poem and song combination. Green leaves lie scattered among shriveled brown. Orange pumpkins tug on their vines in expectation of jack-o'-lantern ends. As the day of witch and superstition draws nigh, the sun in fearful anticipation rises late, and at the first sign of darkness scampers home. Oh, the bats and the rats and the skunk, they all come to spelunk under my bed at night. Under my bed at night. Oh, it gives me such a fright when the bats and the rats and the skunk spelunk under my bed at night. Oh, the birds and the squirrel and the mice, they do things that aren't very nice under my bed at night, under my bed at night. Oh, it gives me such a fright when the birds and the squirrels and the mice aren't nice under my bed at night. Oh, the dogs and the cats and the ants, they laugh, they whistle and dance under my bed at night, under my bed at night. Oh, it gives me such a fright when the dogs and the ants, when the dogs and the cats and the ants come dance under my bed at night. Oh, the spiders, snakes, and slugs, they all come here for hugs under my bed at night, under my bed at night. Oh, it gives me such a fright when the spiders, snakes, and slugs all hug under my bed at night, under my bed at night, under my bed at night, under my bed at night.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much. That was a very fun Halloween poem. And boy, what an ending. I don't know who jumped to figure Liz's image is right next to me on my screen, and we both. So thank you very much. And that is an excellent final story for our actually for our pre-Halloween swap. And it's nice we began with song and now we're closed with song as well. And so for the final, I guess the final component of our evening, I will hand the floor over to Sally.
Unmute, Sally.
All right. What a wonderful evening. Happy Halloween, everyone. And aren't we fortunate to have our swap in such wonderful hands? Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Marnie. As you can see, I'm sort of stepping back and leading this swap into a new time, a new year almost coming up, and just so appreciate all the support of the listeners. You're such an important part of this, and to know that Tail Spinners is going to go on maybe for another 20 years, who knows? But anyway, we will not be with you in November. We will return in December, but in the following months, have a wonderful time, be safe, count all your blessings, and we'll see you in a month or so. And thanks to all the people that told tonight. It was splendid. Thank you so much. Good night.
Love you, Sally.
Good night.